Hi, I'm Jian Wei, co-founder and CEO of BuildZoom, a marketplace that came out of Y Combinator back in 2013. We grew it from 0 to 1, operated it, and scaled it up until this past year when we sold it. Building and growing a company was simply an incredible experience. We did a lot of great things, made a lot of big mistakes. However, we didn't repeat those mistakes often, and many of our greatest accomplishments were a direct result of making big mistakes, understanding why we made those mistakes, and then improving. So I'd like to share some insights with you all from what I've learned over these past 12 years, and thought a good starting point would be to talk about hiring. Over the past 12 years, I was directly involved with the hiring of literally hundreds of employees and the interview of maybe thousands of prospective team members. In our formative years, I handled all of the hiring, and given the range of things I had to do, it was important to create a very systematic approach that respected everybody's time so we could work on building the platform. I do think talent acquisition can sometimes be overlooked as one of the integral aspects that contributes to a company's success. I happen to think it's one of the 4 to 5 most important things, particularly during a company's formative years. And so I just felt it would be a really good starting point.
This gentleman's name is...
Shut it. All I want to hear are your answers. How'd you feel about your comrades dying?
It's whatever.
I thought, they're all dead now.
Do either of you want revenge?
That ain't my scene. Shit's super depressing.
Verily.
Humans or devils? Which side are you on?
The side that's gonna take the best care of me.
The one that's winning.
Know what you just got? Perfect scores.
I'd say the right starting point for building a great team involves making an honest assessment of the culture of your company, if you even have sat down and thought about it. We discovered ours through a process of induction. Commonly, members of a team, in terms of their overall dynamism and value to the company, will follow a normal distribution. And the goal is to go from that normal distribution into a left-skewed distribution, where the x-axis represents increasing contributions to the company and value created. So in order to do this, it's a good practice to identify the common attributes of those in the upper quartile and the common attributes of those in the lower quartile. Those will often be a really great signal as to what are the characteristics that you really value and that are going to eventually fit into this company. With us, we boiled it down to 3. I wouldn't recommend a really long list. Otherwise, people aren't going to take it seriously, or maybe it'll get too complicated. So try to keep it fairly simple. The first was sort of a sense of contagious energy, right? We noticed that while we engaged with folks in the upper quartile, we would come away from those meetings feeling energized and really psyched to kind of get back to work and move things forward. Conversely, when we would interact with folks in the lower quartile, we'd sometimes come out of those discussions just feeling exhausted or needing to take a breather before continuing on with our daily schedule. The second characteristic is leading from the front. What I mean by this is a willingness actually an eagerness to get in the trenches and teach by doing and not simply delegating or saying, right? We really liked people who got their hands dirty, wanted to solve problems. Not that they would be doing that 24/7, but there was a certain eagerness to dive in and work with their team that we really appreciated. The third was just tenacity, sort of a tireless, almost an obsessive need to solve a specific problem and to remove obstacles and move forward at all costs. And so we really started to glom onto these three characteristics, and they became integral to the entirety of our hiring process. Now, the goal of sourcing is to get a large pool of candidates with a high median probability of being the one who gets hired. And I'm going to make an assumption that we already have a clear understanding of what this role is. This is a mistake we made, and I've seen plenty of people make it, where they'll write a list of all the different tasks that need to get done that they don't really enjoy doing, and we'll combine it all together. And that's not really a job rec. That's just a list of stuff that people don't like to do, and it doesn't necessarily yield great results. And there's actually a position called hustler. You'll often see this in startups. I would urge against it. I think that it's not doing any favors to the company, nor to the hustler in the long term. I would actually be a little bit more thoughtful about people accepting their chores early on and hiring for roles that are going to have really good trajectories and long-term sustainability. So we would take what I would consider a heuristic approach, right? Again, operating under the assumption that we have a clear understanding of the role, we should then be able to answer a pretty basic question. What does great look like? We should be able to pop up LinkedIn and find profiles of individuals out there who are great, who we would love to fill this role. Now, if we can do that, we can then start to look for common attributes of what great looks like. And those common attributes are then going to translate into our outbound sourcing activities. We're going to go on to platforms like LinkedIn. We also, way back when, used AngelList quite aggressively, I'd say. Apply the filters that correspond to the attributes of what great looks like, and then really go to town and go outbound and try to connect with as many folks as possible and ask them if they want to be part of what we are building. And so this is often done in combination with the inbound stuff, right? Like creating the job spec, putting it up on the job boards, get a certain influx, whether it's LinkedIn or Indeed, it's not a bad thing, but relying solely on inbound, I think, is a big mistake. And again, that's something I tend to see folks do, which is create a job spec, put it up on job boards, and just wait for the inbound. And then this becomes your pool. I just have observed that the median probability of being the one tends to be a little lower, and you get trapped in the zero-sum game where you're like, this is our pool. We got to hire someone from this pool. And you just don't really end up with necessarily the optimal candidate this way. So now we have this pool of really exciting candidates. Each one has some probability of being the one, right? They look really good on paper, and we want to then go through pre-qualification. Now, I distinguish this from qualification because we have assembled a rather large pool of candidates, and we have to respect the time. One of our most valuable commodities is, especially early on, is really the time of our core team. We don't want them spending all their time interviewing folks. We want to be judicious with that. We want them building the platform or working on go-to-market. And so pre-qualification is something that I think is worth distinguishing and worth applying, so that when we do use this valuable commodity, we're using it in a way that is going to just have a higher probability of yielding results. What we personally did was administer 2 diagnostics. One is called the CCAT, and that stands for Criteria Cognitive Aptitude Test, sort of like a mini IQ test. And the second was called the CPI, Criteria Personality Inventory, I think. Now, we didn't really end up using the CPI because we couldn't really find any meaningful correlations between scores on the CPI or certain personality characteristics and high performance. However, we did find a very strong correlation between those who placed in the 80 percentile or above on the CCAT and our upper quartile of performers. Now, that all being said, this wasn't the end-all and be-all, right? However, if somebody were to score lower than the 60 percentile on the CCAT, depending on the position, we would generally not move forward with them. It would be the folks that scored above a 60% that we would end up moving forward with. So this brings us to the third stage in our funnel, qualification. This is the first stage that we're actively getting members of our team involved by conducting a 30-minute call. And so we had 3 very explicit things we wanted to accomplish during this 30-minute call. A, we wanted to avoid getting catfished. Or put in other words, we wanted to validate that the person we're talking with on the phone is the same person that they've claimed to be on paper. Personally, the way I always validated this was by focusing more on depth than breadth. I would find some claim, like, hey, I personally drove an increase in top-line revenue 4x year over year while maintaining bottom-line margins. Okay, something like this. And I would start asking questions. Well, how did you do this? Who else was involved? Right? You want to ascertain, was this person a bystander, or was this person a driving force? Or did this thing even actually happen? And you can quickly do that by focusing on one area and then going deep and just asking question after question after question. The snake oil salesmen will always reveal themselves this way.
How do 3 men in their 30s not have $800 between them?
The economy is in shambles. Taking the NASDAQ marketplace right now. Dow Jones.
And if there is a really bold claim, and this person actually was the driving force behind that bold claim, that's an awesome signal. Now, second, we wanted to evaluate something that I called trajectory fit. What I mean by this is I wanted to understand where the candidate was in their overall career and what did their next 5 years look like. Because I wanted to make sure that their trajectory matched up, at least in theory, with the trajectory of the company. And so, because I wanted, if we're going to invest all this time and energy into getting this person ramped up and bringing them in as part of the team, if they're gone in a year or two because there is a lack of trajectory alignment, then we've just wasted a lot of time, and there's going to be some serious switching costs we're going to have to pay down. So evaluating trajectory fit would be sort of the second real goal of the qualification goal. And then third is, this is, again, our first real live engagement with the candidate. This is our opportunity to really start evaluating culture fit. And again, in our case, when we really started humming was after we had come up with this, again, I put it on the board back here, this simple articulation, 3-point articulation of the most important characteristics that compose our culture. So I covered a lot of ground, maybe more. If you're still here, thank you so much. In the next video, I'm going to go through the evaluation process, including how we learn to conduct due diligence and ultimately the hire, right? We've put all this effort into moving this candidate through the funnel, and by the time they're at the bottom of the funnel and we want to hire them, there's almost this consensus thought that by not hiring them, we're losing value, we're losing money. So we want to get them on board. And so I think those merit their own video. Maybe I can kind of get them into one, just so there's like a part 1 and part 2. If there's any questions or you'd like me to go deeper in a certain area, please just post that in the comments below. Also, as this is the first video I've made, I'd welcome any constructive feedback or ideas on how to make these the most helpful for you. Again, I think that's the real goal for me. That's what would be gratifying for me, if I can share some of the things that we figured out, usually by making mistakes first. And if you can get some value out of this that you can apply to your own initiative, that would be, so I'm doing this really in the hopes that others will get value and maybe not make some of the mistakes that we made. So thanks for your time, and I will see you in the next one.